I think he can. How you guys doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good to see everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Ed. All right. Obviously, really excited to get 3 new players here tonight. Obviously, starting with Omar Norman Lott, at 263, defensive tackle from Tennessee. Really explosive kid. He showed us up on tape. He's really explosive, athletic. He can run. He's really disruptive. Really good interior rusher. We watched him like we saw on tape, but also Senior Bowl. We brought him in for a visit. A really fun kid, personable kid. I think he'll fit really well in the room. At 366, we went D-line again with Ashton Gelati, a defensive end from Louisville. This kid plays 100 miles an hour. I mean, he is everything you want in a football player, from makeup to how he plays the game, inside, outside. When you turn the tape on, the guy is absolutely relentless. Probably one of the higher character kids we came across all year. Pat Sperduto, Terry Delp went in there, did a phenomenal job just gathering information, and came back and said, this kid's special. And then you turn the tape on, he's got the athletic traits, the physical traits, and he's a very skilled player too. And then at 385, we traded up with New England 10 spots. Traded a 4th-round pick next year to pick up Noel Williams, cornerback from California, a guy that we had relatively high on the board, an outside corner that he can play inside, he can play safety. He's a really good special teams guy. He can return. He's got 14 career picks. Another really high character kid that I think, in terms of versatility, depth, he's what our coaches are looking for. And we thought it was a great opportunity to be aggressive and get a corner, get a premier guy at a premier position that can really help our team. So really excited. I know Coach Spags had a good day. So with that, open up to questions.
When it comes to Omar, obviously you guys really like the traits, but it seemed like he was more of a rotational player. What did you discover in talking to the school about that?
Yeah, so that's the first thing. It's a heavy rotation there. So I think he played only about 25% of snaps, and that's everybody. And in those snaps, you're talking about a guy that maximizes his snaps. Just the unique explosion he has off the ball. We saw a guy that was really conditioned. He's got a great frame. He's got 11-inch hands, 34-inch arms. He's strong for his size. And then you go down to Senior Bowl, and he was really impressive down there. I thought he was one of the better interior D linemen. So we envision him being a really productive rotational guy.
Mike, just when you look at the first 2 picks, obviously the similarity just rushing the quarterback, was that a point of emphasis today driven by need or just how the board felt that these were the guys you liked?
Yeah, Sam, I think it was really the board. I think those guys, we kind of reset the board yesterday, and it was clear those guys were rated pretty highly. And we thought it was an opportunity to just get those guys back to back. You can never have enough of them. And I think, Omar with his inside rush and Ashton just with his versatility, I thought those guys are just too hard to find. So I think it was one of those, you didn't know how the board was going to come off in the second round, but we were, surprised and obviously really excited. They're both there.
With Ashton specifically, doesn't the sack numbers he had as a junior seem like the pressures were still there? Is that what you guys saw?
Yeah, the pressure's there. Yeah. Sometimes the sack numbers I think can be a little misleading. So hurry rate, pressure rate, you can feel them when you watch the tape. Just the activity. And then I'll tell you, one more thing about him. He dropped a little weight, this spring, and his pro day was probably one of the better pro days we saw all spring. Explosiveness, athleticism, movement was like a linebacker. So that kind of sold us on just what kind of physical talent he had.
He also trained with George Karloff.
Yeah, we talked. Yeah, we talked to the kid, when he on a Zoom, and it's funny because they are kind of 2 peas in a pod, very wired similarly. You talk to them, you see a lot of George in them, both in how they play and just how they conduct themselves.
Mike, specifically with Williams, what do you see his readiness to play? Do you feel like he can come in and compete for a job?
Yeah, I think he, with a guy that's a 4-year starter with that kind of intelligence, experience, I think he can, come in and contribute right away. Now, I think we have a lot of good players in the room. I think his special teams, the value there is obviously where he can probably make an impact, early. So I think, just with his experience, his resume, I think he's probably more pro-ready than, a lot of corners you might take in that, range.
And Mike, obviously his trade up came at a cost of
Mhm.
fourth round pick next year. Can you describe what the urgency was to go up and get that?
Yeah, we saw, there were some corners that, was kind of run on those corners in round 3. And a lot of those guys were nickels that, could play inside, but maybe not were outside guys. And, Noel was a guy that, because of his versatility, we thought there could be a drop-off after him. So in that case, a guy like that at a premium position, I think it's worth, making that kind of move.
Can you clarify if that was the Bears or for your pick?
That was the Bears pick.
Okay.
Yeah.
We know that Steve and Dave Merritt, they like a certain type of cornerback. What makes him fit sort of their mold?
I'd say size, technique, instincts. He tackles. I think that's that's a premium. I mean, those guys, they got to take on blocks. They got to throw their body around. So I think that first. I think just the size, the toughness, the tackling, and just the ball production. I mean, that's not by accident. I mean, those he's truly productive on the ball, and usually those guys translate well to our league.
In talking to the pass rusher, Ashton, it seemed like you mentioned his makeup. Is that one of the better makeups you've seen in maybe any
Yeah.
prospect?
Yeah, it was.
What makes that fit?
Yeah, like I said, Pat and Terry, when they went in there, we graded these guys' character, and there's a a kind of a rare category that not many players get to, and just with the kind of person he is, not just the football character, just the work ethic, the leadership, the coachability, just the person he is. We talked to the kid, just about life, just outside of football, like that just he just screams like that's a successful player / person.
With Williams, you mentioned special teams. Will kick return be primary part of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think he had his average was good. I think he's a secure catcher, and I think he's got a lot of upside there. And I think Coach Toe was excited about that, about his coverage ability. So we saw a potential guy that could be a core 4 guy in addition to the return.
And with the tackle conversation with Omar,
Mm-hmm.
Brett mentioned just how, hey, defensive tackle wasn't as deep as maybe some other position groups in this draft. Was there any conversation tonight about maybe trying to move up even to get a tackle in the second round?
Well, there were some conversations. I thought we felt pretty good about the group kind of at the top. And then kind of around in the 40s, you started to see some of those D linemen come off. And especially interior rush, those guys, there's only a handful of them. We saw Omar was kind of the cutoff line. So, we obviously got fortunate. We had a couple conversations about potentially moving up, but like the group of players that were there, potentially at where we picked, and we're fortunate, that he was available.
Mike, can you maybe, it might be hard to, but be more specific about what jumps out about Ashton's character? You said he sort of screams a
Yeah.
rare sort of person. I know he said his sister's a doctor and
Yeah.
things like that. Is it all in the family?
Yeah, and I think if I could speak, if in terms of just the football character piece of it, just the coaches rave about him, and he's one of those guys you can turn the tape on and you're like, this kid loves football. I mean, he is 100 miles an hour. He plays a ton of snaps. Just a football junkie that, he'd fit in any room, and I think he's got true leadership ability. Even potentially as a rookie, he's one of those kind of unique kids.
Like, any good stories to tell us about Steve Spagnuolo tonight? You said you saw him and was
Yeah, well, he just got the hip done, so he was moving around a little with a little pep in his step tonight, Yeah, very very happy. I mean, those guys, Steve does an amazing job just helping us through the process and identifying guys that we like and both he likes and fit in his scheme, and to get 3 of those guys was takes a little bit of luck, but he's certainly excited.
Sam?
All 4 of these positions have been premium positions.
Mhm.
Just wonder, I mean, I know a lot of teams emphasize that, but just the emphasis that you guys have had as this draft has progressed on that.
Yeah, I think it was this year was nice because I really truly feel like we were in the position to take best player available with all these picks, and certainly when you look horizontally across the board, if it's you're gonna shift to those premium positions, and again I think those were I wouldn't say it was planned like that when we started yesterday, but certainly looking back really happy with how it turned out.
And then I know you always still need to reset your board and whatever, but
Mhm.
Brent had mentioned to us last week about running back particularly and wide receiver. Just wonder how you've seen, I guess, the running back in
Yeah.
particular just unfold over these first 3 rounds.
Yeah, I think it's been, there were obviously some high-end running backs that went, I've always liked the depth of the position, and I still think there's going to be good depth